Okay, let's begin. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Kalisnik, and I'm a senior manager in British Columbia's Trade Policy and Negotiations branch of the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery, and Innovation. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for a webinar on doing business in Australia and New Zealand under the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, otherwise known as the CPTPP. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that I am conducting this webinar, and I'm also living and working with deep gratitude and respect on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. Following some welcoming remarks today, you're going to hear from a few trade officials, as well as some businesses with some experience in the region. Our main objectives are really to raise awareness of the CPTPP and some of the opportunities that it provides in Australia and New Zealand, to provide you with some market intelligence and highlight some sectoral opportunities, let you know about the various levels of trade support available to you as well. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants in a follow-up email along with the presentations that you see today and some other useful resources. If you are experiencing any audio or technical issues, please just send a message using the chat function and direct it either to myself or you can also direct it to Flavia, who should be appearing for you on your screen. Please use the Q&A function at any time. It's at the bottom of your screen, and you can pose questions for speakers there. You can ask questions at any time. We'll try to address them as they come in. But there will also be some time at the end of the session for any additional questions that there may be. Please be as specific as you can and indicate where possible who you are directing your question to. Now I would like to introduce our first speaker. The Honourable George Chow is BC's Minister of State for Trade. Minister Chow has participated in all of our CPTPP sessions so far and has kindly agreed to join us today as well as next week at our CPTPP Japan webinar as well, which I hope you can all join. Thank you, Minister, for joining us today. I will turn things over to you. Minister, I'm just going to get you to unmute here.
Okay, I'm good. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Ben, and good afternoon to all of you in British Columbia, and good morning to those of you in Australia and New Zealand. And my name is George Chow, and I'm the Minister of State for Trade for British Columbia. I'm pleased to speak to you from the city of Victoria in British Columbia on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. And I bring greetings on behalf of our Premier, John Horgan, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you also to the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, Global Affairs Canada, and Export Development Canada for partnering with the government of British Columbia on this event and joining us today here virtually. I hope we can all meet in person soon as we gradually return to more in-person meetings and events. Well, in terms of economic context today, whether it's the ongoing recovery from the pandemic or the challenges brought upon by adverse weather events, I know you are all working hard running your businesses. I'm here to show my appreciation to you for continuing to create jobs and grow the BC economy. And for those who are seeking to export, whether for the first time or to new markets, I hope this session will be helpful for your trade plans. And we have exciting work plans in terms of trade diversification. Even though our immediate economic priority are outlined in Stronger BC, this plan will make life more affordable, train for the jobs of tomorrow, tackle climate change, and position BC for success in the global economy. I know that your business have been hit hard by supply chain challenges and global unrest. It is unfortunate that the response of many national governments has been to restrict exports and implement other protectionist measures. It's clear to our government that trade diversification is more critical than ever. My mandate as a Minister of State for Trade includes the development and implementation of a new trade diversification strategy. The strategy will allow businesses to connect with more international partners, creating more jobs in BC and helping to protect BC's trade network from supply chain disruption, market instability, and geographically specific trends and changes. Free trade agreement information sessions like today's webinar are meant to highlight the opportunity of free trade agreement that can make you more competitive in the global marketplace. Free trade agreements are not a complete solution for trade diversification, but hopefully sessions like today can demystify free trade agreement and help you leverage them where it makes sense. And let's talk about CPTPP, or the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership and its benefit. So Australia was BC's 11th largest goods export destination in 2021, with export from BC totaling more than $325 million. New Zealand was BC's 21st largest goods export destination in 2021, and the export to New Zealand is 113 million. BC and Australia and New Zealand share a strong and diversified commercial relationship and have made efforts to promote inclusive trade. The CPTPP offers opportunity for BC businesses across many sectors in order to enter Australia and New Zealand, or to expand our presence there. BC exporter of mining and forest products, as well as some agri-food, already finding success in Australia and New Zealand. The CPTPP also presents us with the chance to become better integrated with the global value chain, so prevalent in the Indo-Pacific region. The CPTPP makes BC provider of goods and services more competitive than providers from countries that do not have a free trade agreement with these countries, whether it's better market access or other benefits offered under CPTPP. I hope you are able to take advantage of this trade agreement to expand and diversify your exports. BC Trade Support Network, our network, it's a provincial trade investment network that stretches the globe from BC to Asia, Europe, and the United States. Our trade and investment teams have continued to develop opportunities, facilitate virtual business-to-business meetings, and stay connected to key contacts in all markets. These trade and investment offices provide many services, including market intelligence, helping you to find buyer or partner, and representing BC's export goods at meetings and events. Their job is to create and accelerate opportunity for BC exporters like you. We have forged strong relationships with other trade and investment focused partners, like those speaking at today's webinar, and we will work together to support your trade needs. I encourage you to connect with our provincial trade team and as well as our partners to discuss the opportunity created by the CPTPP. So in conclusion, I hope today's webinar provides you with the information and tools you need to explore and succeed in new markets. And I hope you will consider Australia or New Zealand if it aligns with your business plans. My ministry staff offer many information sessions on how Canada's trade agreement can benefit your businesses, workers, community, and investors. A webinar, as Ben said, on doing business in Japan under the CPTPP is taking place on June 7th. So please sign up for that if it's of interest to you. It has been a pleasure to speak with you online, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Chow. for setting that context for us and your welcoming remarks today. You've certainly given our attendees a lot to think about and consider. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
Next, I would like to welcome to the virtual stage Diane Beliveau and Inyop Kim. Diane and Inyop are going to talk about what Export Development Canada, EDC, has to offer businesses like yours in Australia and New Zealand markets. So please take it away, Diane and Inyop.
Thank you, Ben.
Hello, everyone. Is everyone see the screen? Good?
Oh, good.
I guess it's all good. Okay.
Oh, good.
Diane, you want to introduce yourself first and then I go next?
I can do that. I'm Diane Beliveau. I'm the Chief Representative for Australia and New Zealand. I'm based in Sydney since last July. EDC opened an office in Australia about 5 years ago.
Hello, everyone. My name is Inyap Kim. I'm here from Vancouver office of the EDC. I'm helping Canadian exporters be successful globally. And it's our pleasure to be here today to talk about the Australian and New Zealand market. I want to start it off with what we do at our Export Development Canada. EDC is Canada's the export credit agency. We are fully owned by federal government. We are mandated to help Canadian companies successful in a global stage. For over the 75 years, we are helping Canadian companies through our risk mitigation programs, financial programs, and our trade knowledge programs. When I ask like what EDC does, I usually put our programs in 4 different buckets. It's easy to understand. So the first program we do is a financing program. A lot of times you go abroad, then what you need is a working capital, additional working capital. But sometimes your financial institution is reach their risk appetite because maybe your inventories is not in Canada, your account receivables is a foreign receivable. So what we do is we put a guarantee on your bank loans so that bank could lend you more. And also the letters of credit if you need to issue for your suppliers, or sometimes it's a lease. We also backstopping that letters of credit so that you could access to your working capital. And as an international export, international risk expert, we providing the AR insurance so that you could protect yourself against non-payment risk. And also you could determine who do you want to do business with. And over the times, we really built up our expertise around trade knowledge. You have any questions around shipping, taxation, customs, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We do have a dedicated team that help you navigate through these challenges. And then this program is basically free. It's a high cost programs, but all Canadian exporters could utilize this program. And also we do have a connection program. You set your target market and you're looking for introduction for appropriate suppliers, buyers, or vendors. We do make an introduction so you could extend your business network. I want to talk about a little bit deep into our insurance and financial solutions. And then these are the live links so that you could take a look at more information later of the webinar. So AR insurance is, we are cover up to 90% of your AR in case of a non-payment. And at the same time, you could increase your working capital access because your bank will give you a higher margin value for those insured ARs. And as I mentioned, for loan guarantee program is very well utilized so that you could have access to working capital. And that's also very popular during this time, because a lot of companies going through working capital crunch due to supply chain disruptions. And other risk factor I want to point it out is foreign exchange risk when you're going across the border, because you're dealing with a foreign exchange currency. Highly recommend you talk to your financial advisor, talk about FX hedging strategies, and we also backstopping that hedging strategy instrument. And lastly, I want to talk about the buyer financing support. For instance, I have a client who has a agriculture equipment manufacturer, and then they want to go to find buyers in other foreign markets. And if there's a buyer financing together, it makes your products more competitive. So we helping Canadian exporters providing buyer financing guarantees as well. And then we do have other programs available. So feel free to check out our website or just talk to one of us. I'll pass it on to Diane so that she could share her insights and perspectives in doing business in Australia and New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Inyam. I'll take you through a couple of points very quickly, and I'm very happy that you were able to get a good sense of the toolbox that EDC has to offer to support you in exporting around the world. But today we'll be talking particularly about Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand are actually quite easy countries to do business with. They are English speaking, and they also have a similar jurisdiction legal system as Canada. So it's comforting, if you will, to be there. It's easy to find yourself in this type of environment and to operate in this type of environment. Both countries have a strong economy, strong banking market, and also strong ties, trading partners throughout the Pacific. So this can bring you throughout the Pacific region. It's also open to global trade and investment, including in particular the CPTPP, which we will hear more about a little bit later. As easy as it sounds, as comfortable as it may sound to do business in Australia and New Zealand, there are some challenges. One of which is the logistics. For sure, right now, the shipping supply chain, we talk about that a lot. Everything is expensive, is very complicated, but on a normal day, Australia and New Zealand are far, the shipping costs are high, and there are some wait times to do that. So that's to be taken in consideration. There are extreme weather conditions, unfortunately, not very much unlike BC, I have to say, between drought and floods and fires. These are things that you see as well. Earthquakes, particularly in New Zealand, so that can disrupt some of your business sometimes, and unpredictable, of course. There's a well-established competition in both markets, as you should well be aware of. And I think that would be one of the main challenges as well. So you have to know your market, do your homework, and make sure that your product is adapted and has a good market opportunity here in New Zealand and Australia. If you want to make production here, skilled labor shortages are common, as it is in Canada as well. We can go to the next, and I'll finish off very quickly on that. I have my timer next to me, so I know that the time's flying. We're running out of it. How to be successful? Well, it's important to establish a local presence of one way or another, whether it's a distributor, whether it's a physical presence. It helps with the time zones. It helps with getting closer to your clients here. The cultures are similar, but you have little differences. So if you come here and your client offers you to go out for a coffee meeting, maybe in Canada, we're a little bit disappointed. What, you don't want to see me in your office? Here, it's normal course of business to conduct business over coffee, sometimes even beers. You can find some more tips online at EDC. We did a little video about that, so don't be shy to go and check that out. And my last slide before we leave. The key sectors for Australia: mining, energy, it's transitioning into renewable power, clean tech, renewable, infrastructure and services. New Zealand, mostly services, forestry, agriculture, infrastructure, large project infrastructure, and clean tech. If you have any questions at all, here's a team. The BC team is here to help you. I'm well connected with the BC team. They know where to find me, and we're happy to support in whatever you need. We also included in our deck some pointers as well on the last page, some links to help you out with the toolbox. Thank you very much. I appreciate Ben. Again, thank you for inviting us for this webinar. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining, Diane and Inyap, for outlining what these markets and EDC have to offer. And I will just note that all of those links in that presentation, as I said, will be shared with attendees in the coming days. And Diane, as someone who organizes many webinars, I really appreciate you watching the timer. And I say this knowing that I'll probably be struggling to stay within my own time later. So anyway, Diane and Inyap are here throughout, I believe. So please direct any questions you may have to them through the Q&A. Next, I want to introduce our next speaker, Martin Artano, who is Vice Consul and Trade Commissioner with Canada's Trade Commissioner Service in Australia. Martin is going to speak about Australia and New Zealand today, although I will note that we do also have Trade Commissioner Service representatives from New Zealand on the line as well, and so I think they're well equipped to answer your questions, any questions that there may be about both of those markets. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Ben. I'll just quickly share my screen. It won't be long. All right. So hi, everyone. Good afternoon, I guess, for people in BC. Good morning for people in New Zealand and Australia. My name is Martin Artano. I'm a Trade Commissioner. I'm based in Sydney, Australia. I've been here for 4 years. I'm a Canadian. I've been working in Australia, finding opportunities for Canadian businesses for a few years now. So I will share with you my insights. Thank you to Inabe and Diane before me to giving us a very good overview of what the climate of the business is in Australia and New Zealand. I will dig more into that in a few minutes. I will give you more specific opportunities. Before doing so, I will give you a highlight of what our free trade agreements are so far. And I want to also highlight what we do as trade commissioners. It's not everyone, I think, in Canada who knows what we do, so it's important to remind it. We are the Canadian Trade Commissioner Services. We work with Canadian businesses. We will help you export or either invest in other countries. So we have a range of services we provide to you. We can provide you with market information. We can assess your capability to export in certain countries. We can share with you key contacts in our respective markets. We have offices across Canada, so if you are interested to work with us, contact us through our regional offices. You will meet one of my colleagues in Vancouver in a few minutes. So that's it in a nutshell. We're here to help you. It's a free service. It's provided by the Government of Canada. I'll start quickly by giving you a very quick portrait of the Canada's free trade agreements that we have in place. Canada is quite unique. We are, as you know, a trading nation, and in order to maintain our competitive edge, we quickly realized that we had to negotiate free trade agreements with other countries in order to stay on top of the game. We now have 15 free trade agreements currently in force with 49 countries. So it gives us access, preferential access, I should say, to 1.5 billion consumers across the world. We are also in a unique position in the G7. We're the only country of the G7 who has access under free trade agreements to every other member of the G7. So it's an interesting thing to highlight, I think. The key principle of the free trade agreements is to provide non-discrimination and national treatments to every Canadian company. So what it means is basically wherever you go in other free trade agreements market, you will be treated as a domestic company. So if you come here and do business in Australia or New Zealand, you will be treated the same way as Australian businesses or New Zealand businesses. There's also a big focus on transparency in those free trade agreements. So it ensures that the rules for accessing and operating in a free trade agreement market are public, available, and accessible. So again, it ensures that you will be treated the same way as a domestic company here. It gives you also preferential access. You will have better opportunities and better access. So right now, I want to share with you this slide very quickly. We have, as you know, free trade agreements with the US. It was our first one. Mexico, of course, in all of Europe now, most of Europe, I should say. What's interesting with the CPTPP is that before it, we only had one free trade agreement in Asia, and it was with South Korea. Now with the CPTPP, we have access to Australia. On top of that, Japan, which is the third largest economy in the world, Singapore, New Zealand, Vietnam, Malaysia will join, will sign and ratify the CPTPP soon, as well as Brunei. And there's a whole series of Asian countries who have expressed an interest in joining the CPTPP. We're talking of Thailand, China, the Philippines, and a few more are coming in. So it's going to be quite interesting, I think, in terms of opportunities for Canadian companies. Now I will highlight general free trade agreements benefits that we have. I'll go quickly through that because Ben has a presentation after where he will dig deeper into that. But the main benefits that comes into mind when we think of these free trade agreements is the tariff. It's the exports of goods. Most tariffs are now down. I'd say that 99% of all the tariffs are down on goods. So it's pretty interesting. And the way to access that is shown here. But again, Ben will tell you more in a few minutes. So I won't give you all the details there. Just know that there are tools available for you. You can see at the bottom of the slide there, you have a tarifffinder.ca tool where you can determine if you have to pay duties or not on certain goods. And you also have a phone number. It's the Canada Border Service Agency helpline. It's simply called Border Service Information. You can call them if you have questions about exporting or importing, and they will help you through the process. I talked a bit briefly about it before, but the free trade agreements provides transparency and predictable market through various ways that are embedded in the agreement. The whole idea is that you know in advance the rule of the game and that you are treated the same way as a domestic company. Something that is less known of our free trade agreements is that you have a facilitated way of entry into these FTA market. So under CPTPP, you don't know it, but when you apply for a visa or a work permit, you are accessing a faster lane in the immigration system, which means you will get your permits much faster. It will lower the cost related to HR management. It helps you in many ways anyway to get a faster service, and that's the whole idea of this of these conditions on free trade agreements. Something else that is not well known of Canadian businesses is that CPTPP, as well as other free trade agreements we have, is that they open up the foreign government procurement market. That is huge. In average, 10% of GDP of a country is spent on government procurement. So basically, you have access to Australia government procurement as well as New Zealand, just like a local company does. And it's huge. And in New Zealand last year, the government procurement market was about $50 billion. In Australia, it's about 5 times more. So what it gives you is the ability to compete on a level playing field with the local companies. Again, you have access to the tender mechanism, just like the Australian company does and the New Zealand company does. You just click on the links there that are shown on the screen, and you have access basically to the tenders available to you. I'll highlight a few specifics of our markets. The sector that we cover proactively in Australia are aerospace, agri-food, clean tech, defense, security, education, forest product, ICT, life science, mining, and oil and gas. In New Zealand, we cover clean tech, information, communication, and technology as well, and life science as well. And what that means is that we have trade commissioners here on the ground who are experts in all these sectors, and they can help you find potential buyers. If you want to know more about this, I will invite you to contact us. I will share with you our contact information on the last slide. I had more to share with you, but unfortunately, I don't think we have time. But I have a lot of examples I can show you around all of these proactive sectors that we cover. I just want to tell you that Australia and New Zealand are rich countries. They have diversified economies, so there are a lot of opportunities, but there are challenges as well. If Australians are already producing something that you want to sell here, it's going to be a challenge for you to access opportunities here. So if you have a unique product or a service, that will greatly help you in doing business here. I want to finish last by sharing with you some resources and tools that we have. I told you about the Tariff Finder before, but we also have the Market Potential Finder, which is quite interesting. You can enter a goods HS code, the good that you want to export into our tool, and it will give you a potential market to explore where you could sell your goods. So I think it's quite interesting as a tool because we don't always know where to go. The world is quite large, so it can help you greatly, I find. Last, I'm sharing with you our contact email. So Auckland office, as well as Sydney and Canberra offices, as well as the Vancouver office. Speaking of the Vancouver office, I will give the floor now to my colleague in Vancouver. I think I'm not sharing the screen anymore, right?
All good.
Yeah.
I think we're okay. I hope you're doing well.
Sounds good. So I share. I give the floor to Eric Peterson in Vancouver.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Peterson. I'm a trade commissioner in the Pacific Regional Office here in Vancouver. And as Martin mentioned, I'm kind of the domestic angle of the Trade Commissioner Service. So my goal is to be client-facing to the region, while Martin is very much focused on the country there to find the best opportunities for you and your companies. So my goal is to provide you with market intelligence, with the preparation for international markets, the best advice that I can give you to prepare you as you delve further into internationalization. We have some funding programs. The biggest and best of them is Can Export SME, and it helps with all sorts of different things to help you internationalize, whether it's attending trade shows or investing in your IP protection. There's all sorts of things which can be used, that funding can be used for your internationalization. And for the advice that we provide, as Marcin was saying, it's free of charge. We are basically your international business kind of consultant for trying to offshore what you do for reaching those international markets for your sales, whether it's in Australia, New Zealand, whether it's in other countries associated with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or further afield. I'm very glad to have conversations with you. We also have a number of dedicated professionals who support different sectors here in the region. So, for example, I've worked in defense, I've worked in life sciences, cyber security, I do export controls and sanctions issues. We have other officers who deal with agri-food, professional services, ICT. And so we're very glad to have an introductory chat with you to learn more about what your international goals are and how we can help you to meet those goals, whether it's plugging you into our network of trade commissioners such as Martin, or if it's offering you advice on responsible business conduct, on the best ways which you can protect your brand and your business as you go abroad. So I'm very glad to be in touch. I can leave my contact information in the chat, but all the best of luck for your international business plans. So I guess it will go back to Ben, perhaps. Ben, do I pass the ball to you?
You sure can. Thank you, Eric. Hopefully our attendees will reach out the next time they have need assistance from you based in Vancouver. And thank you also, Martin, for your insightful remarks. I think it's great to hear from somebody who is, got that on the ground presence in Australia. And I know we also have Maria Lowe and I believe Fabienne Bovis from the Trade Commissioner Service in New Zealand as well, who are here. And I think this is a great opportunity to pose any questions you may have for them. Maybe it will come to you throughout the session. Please use that Q&A function. And in fact, there is one question right now in the chat. Martin, maybe I will just pose it to you. And it is about, I'm just paraphrasing here, but it is wondering why, this person is wondering why CERS is so difficult to deal with. And I recognize that this is an Australian system, but I wonder if there's anything that you come across, Martin, in your work in dealing with that process. Anything you can say, or maybe any resources that you might be able to point this attendee to.
Thanks, Ben. It's a good question. So good that unfortunately I don't have the answer to it. It's not covered by my sector specifically, but I can definitely ask. If you can give me, I don't know who asked the questions, Tony, I guess. Tony, if you can give me Canadian Export Reporting System portal. That's a good question. It's not something that we deal with on our end. It's probably, I think it refers to the CBSA system, right, Tony? I think if you have a comment or questions about the system, I think you should contact the CBSA helpline. The number I provided you before, they can help you with it. It's unfortunately not something that I have any power on.
Okay, Martin, sorry to put you on the spot there. We will connect, Tony, I will connect with you afterwards, and we will get you the information you need to get some answers. Okay. Okay, I'm going to just keep moving along, and I see that a couple more questions have come in. We'll pose those at the end of the session. So now I will just ask someone to put my presentation up. There we go. So, terrific. Can you just jump to the first slide, please? All right, I'm going to talk a little more about the CPTPP, as Martin mentioned, dive into a few more details. It will be a little more technical, so please bear with me. Before I do, I just want to mention that the Trade Policy and Negotiations branch, which is the branch that I work for, represents BC's interest in both international and domestic free trade agreements negotiations, represents those interests to Canada, of course, as the party to those international agreements, but also is responsible for any trade disputes affecting British Columbia. And we also do these kinds of things, these free trade agreement promotion events, to really try to just raise awareness of the FTAs and the opportunities in them, and provide some information on how to leverage them. So I'm going to jump through a couple of the slides, just because I know Martin has covered some of this very well. The first thing I just wanted to mention, though, is with the CPTPP, when it was being negotiated, BC did some economic modeling, and it found really that BC was expected to benefit more under the CPTPP than under the original TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And this was driven largely by the US departure from that original agreement. So that really ensured that BC businesses like yours would have a leg up on your US competitors in the CPTPP markets. And so that's great, but as Martin also noted, this competitive edge won't last forever. The agreement is designed to accept new members or expand, assuming they meet all of the requirements of the agreement. And so it means that your preferential access can grow as more members join the agreement, but at the same time, you may face more competition as other members join the agreement. That's really why BC is doing as much as it can to capitalize on this advantage and support you to leverage the opportunities under the agreement in Australia and New Zealand and beyond. Next slide, please. So, we know that you don't have the time to be navigating free trade agreements. Some of them are very complex and long. The CPTPP itself is, it's over 1,000 pages. It has 30 chapters with annexes for each party. In effect, it's really 10 bilateral agreements that Canada has entered, rather than one sort of comprehensive, consistent multilateral agreement. As Martin said, it does cover traditional areas of free trade agreements, like goods and services and investment, but it also covers more modern elements of economic partnerships, things like digital trade. There is also a dedicated SME chapter. It is really about encouraging greater SME participation in trade, and whether that's trying to make government procurement opportunities more accessible, whether it's sort of tackling anti-corruption and addressing unfair competition by state-owned enterprises. There are things in this agreement that are not necessarily found in all of the FTAs that Canada is a part of. Fortunately, these things seem to be included more and more as Canada enters into more modern FTAs. The one thing I would mention here is the inclusive trade provisions that are part of the agreement. It is a priority for British Columbia, and Canada has indicated it is a priority as well. And this is really about seeking to ensure that the benefits of these FTAs really accrue to as many people as possible, particularly traditionally underrepresented export groups like women, Indigenous or youth-owned businesses. The CPTPP reaffirms things like the importance of corporate social responsibility, the cultural identity and diversity, gender equality, Indigenous rights, and many other areas of inclusive trade. And finally, the agreement also preserves the right of governments to regulate in the public interest. Next slide, please. So here are I know there's a lot of information up on the screen here, and Martin has already talked about a really useful resource with the Tariff Finder. Of course, tariff cuts and elimination are kind of one of the most tangible aspects of free trade agreements. They're sort of the thing that people point to first. they of course they make your products more competitive in the market in question. And once fully implemented, 99% of tariff lines among CPTPP parties will be tariff free, which is great. Now, what you see on the screen here is Australia's rates under the CPTPP. Compared with the tariff that it applies on products from countries that don't have an FTA with Australia. This is also known as the MFN rate, most favored nation rate. And, you know, to be honest, Australia didn't really have high tariffs to begin with. So the tariff reductions you see here and on key products really aren't as they may not look as attractive as, say, when we look at Vietnam's tariff reductions, because they were starting with very high tariffs to begin with. Nonetheless, who doesn't want 5 or 10%, less on their product going into a country? And these are just a few examples. I really would encourage you to take a look at the Canada Tariff Finder, which I will quickly show you a slide of in 2 slides from now. Please move to the next slide. This is the same thing, but for New Zealand. And just like Australia, New Zealand had fairly low tariffs to begin with. These examples I pulled out based on some of the things that New Zealand imports quite a lot of, but also things that BC produces, and where possible, some of these favorable tariff reductions. But, you know, beyond these tariffs, what FTAs do, like the CPTPP, is really address non-tariff barriers, and this can sometimes it can actually be, you know, more beneficial to you as a business owner, because you know, it's harder to quantify the cost of these non-tariff barriers, but you know, certainly it can save a lot of time and money by addressing them. And so these are things like differing standards, duplicative testing, or unreasonably onerous labeling or certification procedures. You know, in many cases, some of these may be important for health and safety, but when they are not, when there's no valid reason for them and they're hindering trade, these kinds of things need to be addressed. And the good thing is the CPTPP does this by encouraging the use of internationally accepted standards. It establishes committees to address these types of specific non-tariff barriers. And if you are facing these types of barriers, we definitely want to know. I know that the Trade Commissioner Service can definitely raise these with their colleagues in the federal government, and when we are meeting with our colleagues in Global Affairs Canada or CBSA or wherever it may be, these are the types of things that we raise with them. Next slide, please. This is just a screenshot from Canada's Tariff Finder. It's a great tool. It's easy to get started. You just need to know the market you're interested in and your product, and you can do that by a keyword or an HS code. So I strongly encourage you to take a look at that. Next slide, please. Okay, Martin covered some of this, so I won't get into too much detail here. He talked about tariff preferences and rules of origin compliance. These things can be quite complicated. Every agreement, including CPTPP, may have slightly different rules, and so that's unfortunate. But I'll talk about something in a minute that will hopefully help that situation. Generally, if your product is wholly originating from Canada, then you should be fine. But once you start to have a product that contains inputs from various locations, then it may get a little complicated. The good thing about the CPTPP is that the rule of accumulation applies. And so under this agreement, a good is still originating, even if it is being produced by different producers in different areas of the CPTPP area. And so that's something that you can really leverage to be able to take advantage of the global value chains in the CPTPP region. Martin talked about claiming preferential access. Unfortunately, it's not automatically granted, but the good thing with the CPTPP, unlike some of the other FTAs that we have, is that the exporter, producer, or importer can fill out the certificate of origin, which is great. It doesn't have to be a prescribed format. It needs to be in writing, which includes electronically, and there are some minimum data requirements, of course. Those are all outlined quite clearly on the CPTPP website. But beyond that, if it's in English, it has to be accepted. And and it can also apply to multiple shipments of the same good, which is also a positive. The last thing on this slide here is something called an advance ruling. And this is, I know that some of this can sound overwhelming, especially if you haven't started exporting, but what an advance ruling is, it's really one of the single most effective tools in an exporting toolbox. And what it does is really give you certainty by applying to the relevant customs authority to determine that whether your product has been coded properly under the right HS code, but also whether it meets those rules of origin we were just talking about. And so these are written into the CPTPP and many other FTAs. They are binding on that customs authority. So once they make that ruling, they have to abide by it. And usually there is no or very little cost to going through this process. So it's something I would encourage you to take a look at. Next slide, please. Okay, again, Martin talked about some of this, not necessarily with respect to services, but he did talk about being treated fairly and being treated as though you were a domestic producer or a domestic supplier, and that's really what the main point of this slide is here. It is, the CPTPP, like all FTAs, contains some core obligations around things like national treatment and most favored nation. So knowing that your service in this case will not receive any worse treatment than Australia or New Zealand are providing their other FTA or WTO partners is one thing, and the same thing with national treatment. Knowing that your good will be provided that domestic treatment is also should be reassuring. The other thing I'll mention here is that that parties should not be imposing any sort of restrictions on the quantity or the types of entities that can be supplying services within their border. Excuse me. And service providers also benefit under the CPTPP from some increased market access. So with Australia, in particularly professional, computer-related R&D, construction and environmental services. So there's some increased market access under this agreement. And then with New Zealand, professional R&D, construction, education, environmental, and energy distribution services. Martin touched on temporary entry. I think the only thing I'll mention here is that both parties, both countries do have slightly different requirements. So please don't, if you determine that you are eligible to enter under Australia, for example, please don't just assume that you also are eligible to enter into New Zealand because they may have slightly different requirements there. And he also touched on government procurement. So I'll move on to my last slide. And that is on investment. These concepts really just mirror everything that I really just talked about with respect to services. So, the idea with the CPTPP is to create as fair and transparent of an investment climate as possible. National treatment and MFN, the same standards that I just went through. Parties cannot be implementing things like performance requirements. They can't require that they can't tie to your investment a buy local requirement or something like that. Your investments are covered, protected against things like expropriation, except for specific circumstances and when accompanied by adequate compensation. And again, temporary entry applies. In this case, it is applicable for Australia, but not New Zealand. So that is the end of my presentation. You can move to the next slide, please. Just my contact information, which you will get by email anyway. I know I went through that quite quickly, and I apologize, but I just wanted to finish by saying if you are interested in these markets, or if you're interested in leveraging the CPTPP or any FTA, please do contact me, and I'll make sure that you get connected with the right people. Thank you. And now it's that awkward moment when I have to now transition from myself to our next speaker. So I'm going to next introduce Dr. A.W. Lee, who is the Senior Program Manager, Diversity and Inclusive Growth Strategy for Women Entrepreneurs with the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Thank you for joining us today, A.W. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ben. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that? Great.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great. Kia ora, hello, bonjour to everyone in BC, Australia, and New Zealand. So thanks for the introduction, Ben. And my name is A.W. Lee, and I support women and gender non-binary entrepreneurs to introduce them and their companies to new markets in the Asia Pacific through dedicated trade missions specifically designed for them. And so I would also like to acknowledge that I join you from the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. And I would like to offer my sincere gratitude as a racialized migrant settler to my friends and neighbors, Kenteke Kanyankahaka Bay of Quinte Mohawks, for continuing to steward the land that we share. And it is through my commitment to growing ties of friendship between Canada and Asia with the women's trade missions that I'm here to talk to you about, that I'm also committed to growing economic prosperity, not just for diverse women entrepreneurs, but also supporting economic opportunities for Indigenous businesses to share in global economic growth between our regions. And so some background about our foundation, if you're unfamiliar, we are a nonprofit national think tank focused on building bridges and strengthening ties between Canada and Asia. And our mission is to be Canada's catalyst for engaging with Asia and be Asia's bridge to Canada, vice versa. So in that vein, stemming from national focus group research that we conducted in 2017, 2018 with convening women in business across Canada, we delivered the first ever Canadian women-only business mission to Japan in 2019. And following the success of that trade mission, we then went on to conduct and lead missions to South Korea, Taiwan, India, and Australia and New Zealand. And we have an upcoming in-person trade mission this year, which I'll touch on briefly at the end. But for Australia and New Zealand, in December of 2021, and in partnership with SheEO and with strong support from both the private and public sectors, including EDC and the Trade Commissioner Service on the call today, APF Canada hosted our first Canadian women-only virtual trade mission to Australia and New Zealand. And a key supporting organization in that initiative was IndigiX, an organization based in Western Canada that facilitates the connection of Indigenous professionals around the world, encouraging collaboration and economic growth, identifying business opportunities, and engaging in international trade. And with IndigiX's strong connections between Canada and New Zealand and Australia, we were able to highlight the theme of partnership opportunities specifically between Indigenous women-owned businesses in Canada and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and Maori-owned businesses in Australia and New Zealand, respectively. So we introduced a select delegation of 20 women and gender non-binary entrepreneurs from Canada to Australia and New Zealand. And the format of the mission included several market training opportunities leading up to the conference in December. We had several of our panelists here or their colleagues provide high-level market opportunity analysis in Australia and New Zealand, which is very helpful. And in December, we had high-level discussions of gender inclusion with ministerial participation, touching on best practices, policy opportunities to advance gender equity in trade and business and broadly. But most importantly of all, we facilitated over 160 B2B meetings for our delegates across Australia and New Zealand, so through our third-party B2B consultants. And the story that I want to emphasize here is that our intentional pursuit of inclusive trade opportunities opened up strategic market entry for many of our delegates, and especially for our Indigenous women-owned businesses. So here is a snapshot of some of our B2B meetings that were facilitated. And if you've ever been a part of any trade mission or trade show, you'll know that not all the meetings result in tangible outcomes, but we are very proud of many of our delegates and about a third of our meetings with New Zealand counterparts have continued in negotiations for partnership collaborations, either for distribution or direct purchase or R&D partnership. And some have already reached the stage of signing non-disclosure agreements to move on to their next stage of negotiations. And in Australia, we had about 11 negotiations ongoing from across our approximately 20 delegates. And especially for our Indigenous owned companies, we received reports that almost all of them had potential for collaboration with some of their meetings, with follow-on negotiations from at least one of their meetings. And so I want to emphasize that inclusive trade and progressive social policy we believe creates these real opportunities for market entry, especially for women-owned businesses and Indigenous-owned businesses. So like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, like was touched on by previous speakers, are like-minded, rules-based countries with shared values and social policy objectives, such as advancing gender equity, supporting women-owned businesses and racialized minority groups, and especially supporting Indigenous-owned businesses in their pursuit of economic reconciliation. And we share a lot of ESG goals, so stated policy goals supporting climate action and gender equity, leading to general sector opportunities. For example, New Zealand, their government procurement rules include a broader outcomes-based framework, which incorporate government procurement rules requiring government agencies to consider specific priority outcomes when buying from designated contractors. And this includes procuring solutions for zero net emissions and meeting their goal of significantly reducing waste. So this creates opportunities for circular economy solutions, energy efficiency companies, carbon capture, et cetera, et cetera. And one other specific provision includes upskilling women in domestic construction. So theoretically, if you provide services to the construction sector, this could incentivize you to leverage this channel to market by partnering with women companies in New Zealand to deliver your services or products. And practically speaking, one of our delegates company, their product and value proposition aligned with this because she designs gear and wearables specifically for women in trade. And so she was very interested in this potential opportunity. And so, like Martin and Ben mentioned, procurement is a significant interest to many of our delegate companies. And so many of whom were in clean tech and the medical technology sector. So they're interested in engaging public sector agencies for procurement contracts. And so like both Ben and Martin mentioned, the government procurement chapter in the CPTPP allows us, Canadian companies and BC companies, to compete fairly in the procurement process. And so Canadian companies will receive the same treatment as domestic suppliers when bidding on these tenders. And so as part of our trade mission and through our in-market B2B partners, we had our delegates introduced to the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment in New Zealand, which guided our companies through their government electronic tender system, the GETS, which Martin mentioned, and AusTender is the Australian equivalent, which they both allow international and domestic companies to submit their bids for these tenders. But because they are wide open, it is also highly competitive. So while they don't give preferential treatment to domestic companies, they obviously have some natural advantages being closer to their government customers. Lower shipping costs, familiarity with regulatory agencies. So this is where developing in-market partners can help and is the sole focus of our business missions. So if any of you have been part of the procurement process, you'll know in any country, you'll know that it can be difficult and sometimes bureaucratic with long lead times. And Australia and New Zealand are no different. But like Canada, inclusive growth are stated policy objectives in all our countries. So we believe that companies can leverage social policy procurement rules and principles when thinking about entering the market through international partnership development. So even though those rules and principles may not apply to you as a foreign company, partnering with domestic groups, companies in Australia and New Zealand that satisfy those requirements is a very smart strategy, which many of our delegates chose to do and see an opportunity. So, for example, Australia has the Commonwealth procurement rules, which are administered by the Department of Finance and dictate that contracts be tendered with an eye to broader benefits to the Australian economy and society. And they're connected to procurement connected policies that are used to connect those procurement purchases with wider social goals. So this includes the Indigenous procurement policy and the workplace gender equality procurement principles. The latter require companies with over 100 employees to demonstrate compliance with Workplace Gender Equity Act in order to receive larger contracts. So this was of particular interest to some of our delegates who offered software as a service that utilize AI machine learning for regulatory compliance, and they could easily apply it to the Australian context. And the Indigenous procurement policy is a procurement connected policy that sets targets for purchasing volume and value from Indigenous enterprises. This is Australian Indigenous enterprises. And this has generated over $5.3 billion Australian dollars for Indigenous enterprises, increasing the number of contracts tendered to Indigenous companies by more than 400%. And so these set-asides are a really good opportunity to incentivize BC companies, Canadian companies, to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders companies. And in New Zealand, they have a similar target of 5% of contracts by volume to go to Maori-owned businesses. And it works out that some of our delegates' companies include their sales models include software licensing that were appropriate B2B solutions for Maori-owned businesses that we connected them with. And so the point here is that inclusive goal of supporting Indigenous companies in both regions can be leveraged into a bilateral opportunity for some companies if your value proposition and sales model do align. And this could be a potential channel to market for you if partnering with Indigenous companies in market. So I just want to leave off with, it's true that Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are all at different stages of reconciliation, and we have a very far way to go. This week, for example, is National Reconciliation Week in Australia, and their new Prime Minister has made some significant commitments to move the dial on reconciliation, which potentially could open up new opportunities for doing business with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander companies. And all three are uniquely bound together by strong and growing relationships between Indigenous peoples, presenting significant opportunities for Maori, First Nations, Inuit and Métis, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to connect not only on social and cultural opportunities, but also business and trade. And so we're at the Asia Pacific very proud to support these international relations between Indigenous people, women, and racialized entrepreneurs, which we believe is a win-win both on social policy and business objectives. And so I'm sorry, I know, Ben, I'm a little over, but if I may just plug a couple of upcoming opportunities, one for our partner, SheEO, which helps connect women and non-binary entrepreneurs with financing and capital. They are accepting applications for new ventures in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Canadian applications are due in September. And if you are already at the stage of having a registered entity and are generating revenue in Australia or New Zealand, even if you are a Canadian company, if you have presence there and are generating revenue, then applications are due very soon, June 10th, for those respective cohorts. And as for us at the foundation, we are leading an in-person mission this year. I did not get permission to disclose where, but probably next week I will be able to disclose that information. And if you'll follow us on social media, you'll learn more about it and when applications open. So thank you very much.
Thank you, AW. No need to apologize. Very exciting and intrigued by what the location will be. But I'm glad you were able to add some meaningful context around the issue of inclusive trade and the work of the foundation and really tie it to some of those opportunities in those two markets. I just want to remind, I know we're running short on time, but remind everyone that you can continue to send your questions in through the Q&A as we're just nearing the last piece of our webinar, which is some success stories from BC businesses who have been operating in Australia. And to that end, we are fortunate to have Darshan Kaler, who is the CEO of Tradable Bits, as well as Mary Clark, who is the founder and CEO of Agents of Discovery. They are here to talk about their experiences. And Darshan, I will maybe ask you to go first, followed by Mary. Darshan, thank you for being here. We're all very interested to hear about your experience with entering the Australian market. How did that come about, and what was the process like for you? Maybe you can just talk about some of the challenges you encountered, if there were, and how you overcame them.
Certainly. So hopefully you can hear me fine. I just want to make sure that that's fine. So yeah, so a little bit about Tradable Bits, so you can kind of understand why we want to expand in the region. So Tradable Bits is a software company focused on providing software solutions for sports, music, and entertainment. We focus on fan experience and everything else. So clients pretty well, use the product in North America, Canada, US, and Mexico. And we had an opportunity just, to evaluate how we could potentially expand in English-speaking region, and the time zone specifically was an easy transition to take a look at Australia and New Zealand. So when we started evaluating how we expand in the region, we were fortunate enough that, some folks within the groups that we were dealing with, government organizations, actually introduced us. So somebody from IRAP introduced us to eventually Can Export, that then got us involved with some of the local representations in Australia. So within, this was around 2019 when we were evaluating how to expand in the region, and predominantly focusing on sports and music in the region. The main challenge that we had was one, we didn't really know, where and how the differentiation between whether we want to localize or extend the Canadian company into the region or create a subsidiary. So immediately we were trying to figure out legal ramifications of doing business within the region. And we were able to get connected and introduced. So by the time we did fly and go to Sydney and Melbourne, the local representations through the connections with those entities that I talked about allowed us to meet with both accountants and legal teams to discuss, how do we expand in the region. Now, interestingly enough, we eventually, within 2 months time frame, we were able to incorporate, open up an operations and do our first hire within, February of 2020. Now, that's an interesting date because in March of 2020, as everybody knows, the pandemic hit. And you would think it would be the worst time to actually expand in the region, but for us, we were very lucky. We were able to close some pretty large contracts and allowed us to, grow the team. So, 2 years later, we have an incorporation there. We have an accounting representation, pay our appropriate taxes and so on, and have a team of now almost 5 people in the region. So, so for us, had we not been introduced to the right channels and so on, I think it would have taken us months and probably a couple of flights back and forth, and maybe even during the timing, probably would have never opened up an operations in the region. Now, the biggest challenge for us when we started to sell in the region before we decided to incorporate in the space was really currency. So when we're starting to distribute our software in the region, everything that we were quoting, had to be basically, let's call it international US dollars as a mechanism of currency. And what we found was it's very difficult for a local to eventually plan for currency exchanges and everything else. And we couldn't really, offer up a revenue stream or a currency in Australian dollars without potentially addressing how we handle taxes and everything else. So for us, the best thing that we ever did was to make that leap. And at this point, that transition really allowed us to function like a local entity, allowing us to export the software within the region, and providing the services and the support and the growth of the team has been able to represent themselves as true Australian company, because they are, through an extension of the TraderBits incorporation here in Canada and based in Vancouver. So that's how, for us, it's been a real success to date. The ability to roll out within 3 months and grow the space. I think today is about 12% of our revenue is coming from Australia.
Wow, thank you, Darshan, for sharing that experience. I'm not sure if you had joined already when Diane was speaking earlier about, I don't think she said it was easy to do business in Australia and New Zealand, but she did mention that, given the language similarities and some of the similarities in legal systems and governments and things like that, that maybe it was easier there than other markets to get into. Did you have that perception going into this? And I mean, it sounds like it happened very quickly, but do you think that was a factor or not?
Absolutely. And so when we started looking at Asia Pacific as a mechanism of going into those markets, there were other countries, or let's say companies, that were reaching to us in the Asia Pacific, everything from South Korea, Japan, Philippines, and it was trying to manage that space was a bit of a let's call it a gauntlet of other issues, whether it be language, cultural, and so forth. But we knew we needed to have a representation within the region. And so for us, it just seemed like the right thing to do. The culture is somewhat the same in Australia than it is in Canada to an extent. Obviously, the rules and regulations, it has its own tweaks and so on, but it is somewhat similar. So in the end, we were able to transition how we do business in the region. Now, had we not hired locally, I think, probably wouldn't have been as successful, because you need that local representation that understands the local culture. How businesses are run is also important. Here, when we're doing business in, let's say, in the United States, and we consider that as an international business, we were originally trying to treat Australia as an international business. And the way we communicate and market in the region, we were treating it just like how we were doing it in the US, which is really incorrect. Once we hired somebody locally, they were able to, explain to us, how does business normally work within the sporting industry, and certainly in the music industry is a bit different. So within Asia Pacific, for example, in the music industry, it's very different than the Western world, even though it's still music. So little things like that to tweak your business ideologies and strategies, it does require that local representation and treat that region differently, even though they speak the same language and so on. So they might seem similar, but in the end, our strategy and marketing initiative is very, very much tweaked very differently than the Western world.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Darshan, for sharing that. And I know you took time out of another meeting to join us, so we really appreciate that. And given that we are getting close, well, we're actually past our official end time, but I do want to pass it over to Mary now to speak about the experience of Agents of Discovery. And I think, Mary, you maybe did you have a couple of slides that you wanted to put up?
Yeah,
Great.
Hi, everyone. I'm very time conscious, and we're starting after the finish time. So we'll really try to make this short. We do have a few slides prepared. and Dr. Krupa, Joel is going to join me. But we also are a SaaS company, and we were visiting Australia and New Zealand thanks to Can Export in 2018 and 19, and the same as what the previous speaker just mentioned. We were there in February 2020, about to close on some great sales. So you can see each of our missions, that we call them, has a different avatar. These are some of our fun tweaked Australian avatars. Next slide, please. And you can see we have experienced pretty significant success, particularly in Queensland, in Sydney, and the South Island of New Zealand with the platform to date. We are actually launching, so these are actual missions and customers. We are going to be launching our first Australia Explorer campaign, where you get enough missions that communities can work together. This is basically Pokemon Go for education. I don't really have time to explain it, but you can tell if it looks like fun, it really is. And Joel, I'm going to hand it over to you just to show a few pictures of our excursion there and talk a little bit about some of our lessons learned.
And
Great.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Joel. I just wanted to say, Mary and Joel, please don't feel too much pressure to cut your presentation. We do want to hear from you, and if folks need to leave, we totally understand. And of course, this is all being recorded, so we can share that later.
Okay, great. Well, keeping that in mind, I will speak slowly then. Yeah, so as Mary mentioned, we are an augmented reality focused organization that's interested in making, a variety of different topics, especially STEM, but, a range of different topics, a little bit more engaging than they might traditionally be. So with that in mind, we were interested in seeking out forward-thinking, technology-forward type countries that benefited from a lot of the things that have already been shared by other presenters here today. So we did, in fact, under a couple of Can Export sponsored trips, head to both New Zealand and Australia. So yeah, this is our, we've tried to make this maybe a little bit more visual than some of the other presentations. So this is our sort of landing spot here in New Zealand. Maybe next slide, please. And from there, we visited a range of different institutions and organizations. No, other way. One of our favorites was Tapuia, which is a Maori cultural center. We had a couple of wonderful tours there from an individual who was very keen on bringing our engagement tool to their site. In the end, unfortunately, we encountered some difficulties owing to COVID and shutdowns and such. But we're hoping to, in this sort of gradual reopening phase, re-engage with them. So we also headed to, if we could go to the next slide, there we go. We benefited, of course, from meeting several people in Auckland. Fabienne, who may be on the line, she's the local trade commissioner, was extremely helpful in coordinating a range of different meetings, not just in Auckland, but in the environs, and just had a great time working with her on setting up relevant meetings. So as I think other speakers have said, the TCS can be very helpful and is a great resource to leverage if you get the opportunity. Yeah, we headed to Hobbiton. We're hoping in the long run, similar to our Southeast Queensland Explorer campaign, to do similar things in both the Matamata area and various parts of New Zealand. So this is a stop we made a couple hours outside Auckland. And yeah, here's us at a zoo. So let's continue on to the next slide and talk a little bit more about Australia. So we, as I mentioned, we also went to Australia, where we found the TCS service equally helpful in setting up targeted meetings that were really, ultimately materialized in sales and in growing new markets in Australia. So we did go and close a sale at the Taronga Zoo, which is a kind of iconic zoo there in the Sydney Harbour area. Next slide, please. Let's keep going, just in the interest of time. Yeah, keep going. And yeah, again, I'm conscious of time, so I'm guessing people would like to get off. But in terms of lessons learned, I think we'd probably echo again a lot of the things that have already been said. Local representation, if you can secure it, is very helpful and can help you in both navigating the sales cycles that are unique to the area, as well as making you different contacts. For our organization, we maybe had a slightly more mixed experience than Darshan just shared. We did have some challenges during COVID with partnerships that were, we thought going to go ahead, but in the end didn't quite go ahead and ended up getting a bit derailed. So we did face some kind of pandemic related challenges that are sort of noteworthy. And yeah, just I feel like I'm at the risk of repeating a lot of things that have already been said. So we just echo and support a lot of the things that were shared by the speakers already. So Mary, I don't know if you had anything else to add, but there's our contact information if anyone is interested in speaking after today's session.
Yeah, I will say that some of the key things we found were that it was very important for us to have avatars and website and local phone numbers that worked in Australia and New Zealand. We were a little unprepared for that in our first trip, but quickly tweaked and found that was really, really important. And our strategy in Australia, because we just closed yesterday with City of Logan, and now it looks like Redland's going to close, has been very focused on horizontal marketing. Just the success that Brisbane's been having has been helping us. We closed with Gold Coast, has sort of been helping spread the word. So yeah, but I can just say that Can Export and Fabienne and TCS was just absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much.
Well, they're excuse me, they are welcome to join in and comment, but I really appreciate that, Mary and Joel. I think that background and experience and practical tips are probably like gold for someone who may be considering, entering the market. So we really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing and attending and taking time out of your busy schedules to do that. I think a lot of questions came in throughout the webinar, and I know many of them were answered already. If there are any outstanding questions, we can of course always connect after the webinar. As I said, the contact information for the presenters will be provided in a follow-up email, so you can always do it that way. I just wanted to just quickly make an opportunity for any of the speakers to make any comments or say anything before we start to sign off here. Okay, well, as you can see, we are surrounded by a wealth of tools in our trade and investment toolkit, insightful market intelligence to, that's on the ground expertise, whether that's, on the ground in these markets or back home here in British Columbia, where we have a presence and representatives who can make the connections that you need. It's a collaborative effort, and we're all here to support you. That is it for today's webinar. I'm sorry that we've gone over time, but do appreciate the speakers presenting on a variety of topics. I hope the message is clear that we're all here to support you and navigate you, help you navigate through your trade journey, whether that's in Australia, New Zealand, or in other markets. Please keep your eyes open for that follow-up email, and thank you for joining us. Thanks to Minister Chow and all of the speakers for your contributions. Hope to hear from everybody soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.